Welcome to Brash Ag, the farm innovation podcast with hosts Raymond King and Kit Franklin. Supported by the Douglas Bomford Trust, advancing knowledge, understanding, practice and competence in the application of engineering and technology to achieve sustainable agriculture.
Welcome to this episode of Brash Ag. We're going to get cracking straight away and get you into the conversation that Kit and I had with Brian Mathew MP. A whistle-stop meeting, but we hope you enjoy.
This isn't going to be a Koonsberg hard-hitting interview by any means, but it's just hopefully a nice end of our first sort of bout of podcast. So, right.
Well, can I start off by saying it's absolutely brilliant that you've managed to make it here. Oh, it's a real pleasure. And it's a rather small office, but it's lovely to see you. So thanks for making it to show up.
Thank you.
Yeah, no. So, thanks for having us. So Ray and I have come down to Westminster today, where we're very pleased to be here with Brian, who is an Ag Eng Member of Parliament. Now, that's our angle on it.
Very, very good. Well, have you had a Member of Parliament before? You probably have.
We probably have at some point. I haven't done my research into that, actually, to be fair.
There was quite a lot of excitement, wasn't there, at the exec meeting of Viagri when he, was it Charlie, wasn't it? The CEO said, we've got a few members of Parliament now. So.
Excellent. A few members of Parliament.
I think he said it. Did he say a couple of names?
No, you're
must find out who the other one is.
Yeah.
So if you find out, do tell me.
Yeah, no. So yeah, I've got a really bad joke to start with, because I know that if you're a lawyer and you're in Parliament, you get called, or you used to. I don't think it really happens anymore. You used to get called the learned. So as an engineer, you should be called the sort of the right honourable problem solver or something. I think.
Yeah, or the muddied being a
cultural engineer. Yeah. Yeah, that would be good. So yeah, no, cool. Very easy, soft start.
Yeah.
What was your sort of into agricultural engineering and that sort of space? If you go back, what was your education and world of your? Yeah,
it goes all the way back to, I did development studies as the first degree, right, at UEA, Norwich, and as part of that, I took a year off, as you do, and went to the Middle East to study herbs and spices, and it was a comparative kind of comparison between Egyptian and Israeli production methods, and it was the whole gamut. So it was how things were done, how things were sold, irrigation, all of that stuff. So a really interesting kind of like practical way into sort of understanding agriculture. So I came back to university after a year away, and I thought, actually, I really like this stuff. Mm-hmm. I also like the travel. I liked being involved in kind of doing, and I thought, there's this course called agriculture engineering at Silsoe College, which sadly is no more, but of course Cranfield is still there, and it was a postgrad diploma, and so I applied for some funding to go on it, and I basically went around, because it was a discretionary grant, so I had to go and see. I went to see all the different political parties on, I think it was Devon County Council in Exeter, and so when I turned up for the kind of interview, I'd seen them all independently. They didn't know that. So they were all kind of winking at me, and it was a slightly strange situation. But I got the grant, which was amazing. So I actually that's kind of what I did.
Always helps to do your homework. Yeah,
indeed. 9 months it took, and they say 9 months. You can sort of do other things like create babies, for example. Mm-hmm. Well, in this case, you could become an agricultural engineer in 9 months, and that's what I did.
Very good. Okay, so then your career has been mostly around water.
Yeah,
and obviously we've gleaned what we can from the internet about that. So we'd love you to expand. So obviously you worked as a water engineer, you worked for WaterAid at one point, you worked for the WHO in their sort of WASH as a WASH advisor, which is the sort of all-round water.
Yes.
So I know there's a huge chunk of career there, but could you sort of summarise the sort of roles, where it took you in the world, all those sorts of things?
It's always good to wind back to the beginning. So Silsoe College at the time had a thing called Student Aid for Agricultural Development. and that was a chance, because it's always been a problem. If you want to work, do you have the experience first, or do you, how do you get into the world of work?
Yeah.
And people often say, yeah, but you haven't got any experience. You might have qualifications, etc. So SAFAD was a chance for us to do some good in the world, and at the same time to get some experience. And we went to Central America. We were based at La Finca de los Niños, which is the farm of the children, basically an orphanage for kids, street kids from the city. And we were supposed to be there for 2 months. But while we were there, I made contacts with the various embassies, including the British Embassy and various other charities around the country. And we found that they really wanted to do stuff. And while they had a group of 10 agricultural engineers, why not use them? So we spent, instead of 2 months, we were there for 6. And we got to do some lovely stuff on the border with El Salvador, in the Musquisha coast, down in the jungle, all around the country, as well as the orphanage. And the orphanage was kind of, getting water supplies, safe water supplies to the orphanage. And we managed to do that.
So, and then that obviously led to a career doing similar initiatives.
No, indeed. And it's funny the way these things work out, because I had been for an interview with Lutheran World Federation, which is a big NGO, a European-based one based in Switzerland, for a job in the Ogaden region of Somalia and Ethiopia, which had been a war zone, and all kinds of crazy stuff was happening there. And I didn't get that job, but I completely messed up the interview. And the lovely director was called Klaus Doling, and he started off the interview speaking in German. And it was like, ich habe keine Deutsch, mein Herr. So then he goes, of course, straight into French. Je parle petit français. And he looks at me and he says, but it says here on your CV. And I said, yeah, well, I've school Danish, I do a bit of school French and a bit of school German. And anyway, the long and the short of it was, I said, look, I've clearly screwed this interview up. Why don't I sit on your side of the desk? Because I know a lot of people from Silsoe College have applied for this job, and let me tell you who should get it. So, and that's what he did. So we went through the interviews together. There was one guy who had, loads of experience, was clearly the right man for the job. He got the job, and I thought, well, that was interesting, but, whatever, this stuff happens. While I was in Honduras, I got a message from the British Embassy saying, call Switzerland Collect, you've got a job. And so I've had to find a telephone that would kind of allow me to do it. I called Switzerland, and they called me back. And that was the start of my overseas aid work. And I was posted then for 2.5 years to Zambia with LWF and United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And we were dealing with Angolan refugees who'd come across the border from Angola. It was an area where there had been fighting between the South Africans, and this is pre-apartheid, apartheid was still in place, in this border area, basically between Namibia and Zambia and Angola. So it's that far south, southwestern corner of Zambia, and it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. It's a wildlife area. In fact, while I was there, an elephant got blown up by a landmine. Quite scary. Sort of left biltong in the trees. But it was a strange time. So the SWAPO had left landmines down for South African armoured vehicles, and the South Africans had left down anti-personnel mines for ordinary people, or fighters, whatever. But and they were quite often around water points, so we had to be quite careful in not using roads that hadn't been used for a long time, just in case we got into some dodgy situations. But anyway, that's ancient history. But then from there, went back to Reading University and did a master's in rural social development. So kind of learning lessons from that. And then I was offered a job in Angola again, this time with LWF, and then went to Sudan. So I was in Darfur with Dutch Aid. It was with a company called Euroconsult, and an interesting time, a bit of a scary time because there was actually fighting going on. But the city of Jenaina, El Jenaina, which is right in the far west of the country, sadly now there have been horrible massacres going on there, and you'll have seen it on the news and stuff. Then there was some fighting going on, but it was out of the town. So as long as you were careful and you figured out where you were going, it was a bit like the weather. Is it raining today? Are they fighting today? Right. And if they weren't, then you were okay to travel from one place to another. But yeah, an interesting time. And we got water to the increasing population because it had gone from probably a population of around 50,000 people to 150,000. Right. All lots of refugees coming into the town. Mm-hmm. And we were supplying water to all of the people in the hinterland around with boreholes and water kiosks and all of that stuff. But it was all the time with my work, it's been how do you get things to work? Because a lot of the time the engineering is quite simple. Yeah. It's how do the people work with the engineering? And one of the lessons we learned there was the importance of involving the women. Mm-hmm. So women are fundamental to water because they usually are the ones that end up carrying it. And we had meetings with the sheikhs and explained what we wanted to do. And that was agreed, which was perhaps surprising, but it was brilliant because we then had meetings. And at the men's meetings, the men would say, oh, thank you, Dutch government, for bringing this wonderful water and blah, blah, blah. The women's meetings, they said, when you ran clean the pipes, because we cleaned the pipes for a few days and we told people, it'll be free water, but after that you're going to have to pay for it. And there was fighting going on between people from different tribes over, so we've got to make sure the water committee's got people from each tribe represented. And all of these important points women knew about, men hadn't even touched on. Yeah. So that's exactly what we did. And well, I hope those schemes are still working, but as I say, there's been absolute horrors in Sudan, especially over the last couple of years. So I haven't, I don't know what's going on there. I just hope peace returns because it's a tragedy.
It sounds to me as though your agricultural engineering experience is not, I was going to ask the question along the lines of how do you apply it, but it sounds it's kind of core really to kind of your kind of past career and every step of it.
Yeah. I remember being shouted at while we were at Silso about the importance of getting surveying right. Mm-hmm. And it was absolutely right. If you're going to survey, you've got to make sure you go in one direction and then you come back again. So you close your survey so that you know what your error is, because there'll always be an error. But if it's a small error, it doesn't matter. But you've got to close it. And so lessons like that were vital, and including in Sudan, where we were putting in pipelines that were kilometers long across the city, and some of it, quite a lot of it, had been built before I got there. My job was to commission it, and we had to redo one of the water points because, quite simply, it had been put in the wrong place.
Okay. So we're a technology podcast, technically, or engineering and technology. So over the years, I've come across lots of apps and widgets and gadgets that are supposed to make the use of water more efficient. Certainly things like irrigation is often very inefficient. Yeah. So, I mean, you might not have any, but have you ever come across, and you don't have to name brands or anything like that, but technologies that have truly helped, or is it all, or actually do they never really hit the spot?
We had to make our own.
Okay.
So being a bit of a sort of spod when it comes to stuff like that, in Zambia, we developed a thing called it was the jet auger. Now, the water supply in the far west of Zambia is from perched aquifers. So the sands are wind-blown loess sands, so very low porosity, but it's there. But where you find the water is literally you've got clay layers that trap water. And so you needed to make sure that wherever you were going to dig a well, because these were hand-dug wells with concrete rings, you had to get it in the right place. So what we did was we augered down till it hit the water level. When the auger hit the water level, you couldn't go any deeper because sand collapses all the time. It's like running sand. So we developed the jet auger, which was a 1/2-inch GI pipe with a hose pipe attached to the top, connected to a stirrup pump. A stirrup pump is like one of these things that are used in the Blitz, to put out incendiary devices on rooftops in London. And you can still buy them because they use them quite often for, mixing fertilizer and getting stuff out around. So we found a place where we could buy some of these, and then you spurt water through the pipe, and by pushing this, you could then push it like a knife through butter, all the way down until you got to the clay layer, and then it would stop. And if you could find water sort of 20 meters each side, or 25 meters, we reckon that was a good place for a well. And then we put down concrete rings. Each ring had a handle, so you could climb in and climb up, very important. And we put in a gravel pack, again, using the old, you did sieve analysis of the sand, so we knew what size gravel. So literally the bottom was pea gravel. It was coarse sand, actually, then pea gravel, then gravel. And we put that in the bottom of the wells. Another bit of technology was the bucket. And while I was there, it was wonderful. Somehow it got out to School of Development Studies that a dev student had reinvented the bucket. Now, with a bucket, of course, if you ever try and put a bucket into a well, it's quite difficult to get it to fill. So what we did was we had long, thin buckets. So as soon as they hit the water at the bottom, they had to turn because they're long and thin. And they'd fill. And so it was easy to kind of get the water out that way. We didn't put hand pumps in because there were loads of hand pumps around, so they're all broken. And we figured, let's just go with something that people can understand. The other bit of technology we adapted was a well house. So each well was inside a house, and the whole point was, this is your well, you built it, let's have it as a place that's important within the community that you look after. And that was the idea behind the well house. It wasn't really to stop things from falling into the well, it was just to make it important. So it's technology, but it's also psychology. It's trying to get the two to work.
And appropriate technology as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you moved on from the sort of international development side of things, into sort of becoming a councillor and then an MP. Do you think there's an engineering mindset that you kind of have and you can apply? Do you think that should be applied more frequently in the sort of
I hope so. I mean, I'm a suck it and see type of bloke. So I do like practical solutions. And I think if you can find something that's going to work that people understand, then I think that's probably a good way to go forward. So I've as a councillor, right, we were dealing with things like flooding, and of course that's being big in the news recently. So I've been liaising with the Environment Agency and with local farmers and people about how do we deal with situations. And it's amazing actually how much knowledge there is quite often out there that you can tap and bring in. And that's what I've been trying to do. So right now, a few days ago, I held a meeting with the Environment Agency in Bradford and Avon. And one of the things I've asked them to look at is whether the river itself needs to be dredged. Now, we're not saying dredging will be the answer, but let's have a look at the bottom. What's there? Has it blocked up over the years? Has it silted up or not? So, let's actually find some ground truth.
I think that's
how they're going to do that.
Yeah, that's really refreshing because I think there's certainly the view of many farmers is that dredging is been completely ignored. So it's just nice. And maybe it does need to be ignored, but maybe we should actually go and do some measurements.
Exactly. So that's what I've asked them to do, and I've got a commitment that they're going to do that.
That's brilliant.
So, you know.
Okay. And I did some work once. I did an hour or so meeting with a civil servant that was organised by the Royal Academy of Engineering, and it was basically to give civil servants exposure to engineers to essentially learn about the engineering process, by which I would mean clear specification, clear review of goals, blah, blah, blah. So I guess from that was something we were kind of coming to as well. Is there that sort of methodical process mindset that you think is helpful in politics? Or obviously in politics you need to be maybe a bit more flexible than that rigid process that engineering maybe sometimes wants?
I like to kind of look at things as an engineer, but I like to be fairly open-minded in the way that we approach stuff. Another project that I've been involved with for a while and we're talking big engineering here, is the whole idea of generating energy from the Severn, and specifically from the Bristol Channel. Now that's the second highest tidal range in the world. It's a huge amount of energy. And when the first work was done on that, which was back in the 1930s by people using slide rules, they figured out the best place to put some kind of a barrage was from Minehead to Aberthaw, because that way you've got the largest amount of impounded water, and therefore the largest amount of energy that you can make from the tide coming in and out every day. And I was working with a Cornish engineer called Rupert Armstrong Evans, and he was asked by the University of Southampton some years ago to look into this. So I got involved with that way back, the first time I stood for Parliament, which was 2010. That's an engineering masterpiece if it ever happens. At the moment it's conceptual, but the amount of energy it would produce, we know because Atkins and Rolls-Royce won the contract to do the research, is 30.4 terawatt hours of electricity per year. Now that sounds a lot, so what is it?
Percent.
Well, the interesting thing is if you look at Hinkley C, if they ever finish it, and if they can ever get it to work, that is 30.2 terawatts of hours of energy per year. So, these numbers are important. So we could be generating around 8% of all the energy we need in this country from the tides, specifically from the Bristol Channel. But obviously there are other places around our coasts where that could be applied as well. We should be doing this stuff. There's all this thing about, solar panels in all directions. I'm not against that. But let's think about the tides. It's baseload energy. It happens every day. The moon goes around the earth.
Yeah, and as an island nation, we have plenty of exposure to it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I guess that might come on to this question. Now you've made it to Parliament, what do you have any main goals of what you're trying to?
Well, I want to see things like that happen. So I've got a meeting coming up soon with the Minister for Energy, for example, just to talk about that project, because it's been sat on ice for years, and they should be looking at it again if we're serious about our energy kind of formula for the future. But there are other things which I could mention to you. In my area, I've got, this is nothing to do with agricultural engineering, but it's still rather interesting. I've got a company called Avon Protection, and they make gas masks, and they've made gas masks right the way back since the First World War, and they invited me to wander around the factory and have a look, and we had a brilliant time looking at all that stuff. But they told us that the Ukrainian government were asking for 300,000 gas masks. Now 100,000 have been produced by them, and about 8,500 were paid for by the UK, and they had others from Dutch paid for some, and the Spanish paid for some, and the Canadians paid for some, and the US paid for some. But there's still a deficit. They need more. And the reason they need them is, you've probably seen the TV footage of the fighting on the border in the Donbass. And what's happening is the Russians are using drones to drop CS gas onto the trenches. Now, if you don't have a respirator, if you don't have a gas mask, and you've got CS gas, you've got to get out, and then you get shot.
Yeah.
So if we can persuade the British government to put money into this, and the cost is equivalent to the cost of one Storm Shadow missile, we could provide the other 200,000 gas masks.
Yeah.
What a brilliant thing that would be.
Yeah.
So, wherever you can find solutions that work, I think we should be pushing for them. That's what I'm in Parliament to do, and that's what I want to achieve. Is whatever we can do to make the situation better.
That's great.
We'd be remiss not to, given the inheritance tax relief.
Yes.
Debate, discussion.
Yeah.
And we've covered it on the podcast a couple of times.
Yeah.
Kit came down to the event a few weeks ago. And it'd just be interesting to kind of get your thoughts and opinions.
Well, I've stood up in Parliament and argued against it. I've first obviously heard about it when Rachel Reeves talked about it on Budget Day. And in fact, one of my colleagues, Tim Farron, said it's going to be like the Great Clearances. It's not going to raise very much money, but it's going to decimate farms, and it's going to scare people. And what is the point? Mm-hmm. There are lots of other ways that we, as Liberal Democrats, have suggested they can raise money. One of them is reversing the tax break that the Tories gave to the banks. And I think something like 4 billion could be raised from that. This is 500 million, I think. So, there's money that could be raised from social media companies. I mean, look at the harm that social media has caused youth in this country in terms of mental health, in terms of all those things. They should be taxed to pay for the NHS. Mm-hmm. There are other ways we could be raising money, and should be. Why doesn't the government go down that route? We have raised it, and we'll carry on raising it. But penalising the farmers, it's counterproductive for food security. It's counterproductive for communities. It's counterproductive, in so many different ways. So we'll keep on, speaking up against it.
Is that something you've seen at your sort of constituency level in terms of conversations? And like, one of our big focuses, obviously, we're kind of one step away from farming in terms of engineering and that sort of things. But one of our key things is focus on investment by farmers into new technologies. And are you seeing, what's your feeling on that? Have you had
I think there's a lot of worry. There's a lot of worry. If I look back to my days in Zimbabwe, I met farmers there who were still driving around Fords and tractors because they were frightened that the government would take their land, and eventually that happened. So you have farmers using tractors that were like 40, 50 years old and keeping them running. If we want to be a sensible country going forward in terms of our food security, everything else, we've got to be as modern and up to date as we can. And if people are worried about the future, they're not going to invest. So it's not clever.
That's kind of our conclusion. That's good to hear. I think we're probably nearly out of time. We have one question that we're trying to ask at the end of all of our interviews now, which is, have you ever, or recently, had an irrational engineering obsession? So my example is, if I was going to be needing car tyres next week, I'd end up spending 3 days reading about car tyres, which I think is an engineering flaw. So I don't know if you've got anything like that rings a bell, where you've irrationally wasted a chunk of your life because of that engineering mindset.
Listen, I have an old Land Rover.
Okay.
There you go.
Say no more. No, it's actually, I got it running the other day, so hopefully see me out in Melksham and Devises in the old yellow Land Rover.
Oh, brilliant, perfect. No, well, we've all had issues with old Land Rovers in our lives, I think. So there you go. Well, Brian Mathew, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it, and we hope that you can fight the corner for both ag engineers and engineering as a whole, really. So
thank you very much, and keep me posted.
You are listening to Brash Ag, supported by the Douglas Bomford Trust.
We've just come off the back of speaking to Brian Mathew, MP for Melksham and Devises, Liberal Democrat, I should say, which I didn't get in when we were in the room. It was a bit of a whirlwind.
It was a massive whirlwind. Yeah, I'm still not sure my feet have quite touched the ground yet. Yeah, it was a whistle stop conversation, but Brian managed to pack a lot in as well. So I mean, I found his application of his sort of entry into agricultural engineering from the sort of more the perspective of his international development work and his work with sort of water and sanitation. I think that was interesting, and I went in with the having sort of researched his career a bit, thinking, maybe his agricultural engineering experience will have sort of influenced some of that work, but actually it was kind of core and integral to that work. I think without his experience in that sector of agricultural engineering, he just wouldn't be where he is today.
Yeah, well, let's go back to that sort of what I would describe the sort of spectrum of agricultural engineering, where you've got soil and water on one end, through mechanical, through hydraulic, through electronic, all the way to computer systems and AI now. But, he was well and truly at that soil water end of agricultural engineering, probably, quite a long way from where we both sit in our mechanical edging on electronic minds, I suppose. But immensely passionate. That's what I loved. Really, really passionate. Clearly has done what he's loved doing his whole career. Clearly he's someone who is interested in the greater good, to coin a phrase. Obviously aid work, now moving into politics. He's a really nice bloke.
Yeah, really, really nice bloke. And it was good to get, experiences, hear about his agricultural engineering experience, but also good to, he did a good job of kind of weaving in his sort of political work around that. And I don't think we could have got away without asking him about agricultural property relief.
Yeah, the inheritance tax question, I think we would have been remiss to have not mentioned it, bear in mind the fact we have covered it in the podcast. And very refreshing to hear that he basically gave a conclusion to it that matches the conclusion that we had. If you take away the stability of a business, then they're not going to invest. And he gave the example of farmers in, I can't remember where he said, but somewhere in Africa, who are still using 40-year-old tractors because they were petrified of investing in anything in case it all got taken away, which he then said it did, which was obviously a shocking story. But it was a question we had to ask. We couldn't not ask it, but yeah, it was great. The one I found interesting, the curveball, was the one on getting the Environment Agency to agree to actually assess the rivers for Bradford upon Avon, because every time farmers say to the Environment Agency, look, you need to dredge our rivers, which again, I'm on board with the fact there's a nuanced argument, discussion that needs to be having here, but the Environment Agency seem to write it off completely. Again, I realise this is a very UK-centric topic for anyone international, but essentially the Environment Agency look after the rivers and the watercourses of the UK, and they just seem to completely write off the idea of dredging rivers. So the fact that he has managed to essentially make them agree to at least do a measurement exercise in his constituency, or local to his constituency, with the Bradford upon Avon flooding recently, is at least an acknowledgement of the Environment Agency that they need to, actually engage in a conversation about dredging and not just say, no, it's all doesn't need doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I took away from that is his application of the sort of engineering mindset. So, he didn't put as fine a point on it, but effectively what he was saying is let's look at this problem, with a bit of data behind us to actually understand what's going on. And I think that's crucial. And I think he did as I say, he didn't really sort of mention that, but actually that seemed to be sort of a fairly common theme. I mean, he actually went into a lot of detail around some specific projects that he's been involved in with sort of trying to tap water out from various places around the world and from underground, and it was just it was interesting to see that he did really have that sort of problem solving approach, and actually when you're working in sort of developing areas, it really is key to make sure that approach is as low tech and as easy to use as it can be. And also I think I like the fact that he had there was an element of a focus on let's try and build places like wells into sort of a place for the community. It's not just simply a functional aspect. And I think that's probably a slight step on from the what one would expect from the engineering approach, and perhaps a little bit more of his sort of soft skills and sort of political approach coming through, which I actually liked.
Well, I think there's a realisation that if you expect any sort of technical change, it's all very good, providing a good engineering solution, but you need to provide a cultural element to any sort of adoption, don't you? There has to be a culture of adoption, and people have to see the benefits of it, and that's going to be different in different places. But it's all very well saying, it doesn't matter what section, here's a great app on a phone to help you farm. If there's no work in the sort of the training, development, cultural piece showing the importance of it, then it's going to fail by the wayside.
Yeah, and I think that approach, it carries through. I mean, it's a human thing, isn't it? So it carries through. We've said it before. Sort of from the cultural side of things, ag tech and new technology adoption kind of comes in from hang on a minute, my neighbour's having a go at that, and that seems like a good idea. Maybe I'll give it a try, and it's sort of building that kind of support from that side of things. So I think it's it was really interesting just to kind of hear his approach, and actually, above everything else, as you mentioned, incredibly enthusiastic. I mean, we were very, very lucky to get some of his time, and actually we're also very lucky to go for a bit of food with him afterwards, and it was amazing to see his sort of passion and enthusiasm for kind of all the work that he was doing, and basically what was going on at a wider level in the government.
Yeah, and when we had lunch, he was very interested in what we were doing with our careers and our previous work and all those things. And you could tell he wasn't just asking pleasantries; he was actually really listening to what we were saying. And hopefully we got a couple of points across that are sort of some of our axes that we'd like to grind, essentially. So hopefully we got a bit of an opportunity to do that as well. Yeah, I mean, we should probably say we're going into it. He said, "How long is this going to take then?" And we said, "Oh, well, an hour would be nice." And he looked at us like, "No chance, I've got far too busy a diary." So half an hour is what we got. I think it was a pretty engaging half an hour. I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Yeah. No, I certainly did. It was really opened my eyes.
And what a brilliant way to sort of wrap up, I guess, our first season, as it were, of podcasting with an interview with a newly sitting member of Parliament. Pretty. I wasn't expecting that when we set out on this journey. No, I mean, I don't think I was either. I mean, a big part of this podcast for me is about meeting new people and having different new experiences that perhaps you wouldn't have kind of day to day. And I think, I don't think when we sat down middle of this year, probably towards the start of this year, really, and said, right, okay, we're going to go and do this podcast. Let's get the wheels in motion. I think I would have thought that we'd be here in London visiting the House of Commons quite so quickly, or perhaps even ever. No, I think it's quite a turn up for the books. Yeah. Right. Well, with that, Ray, we'll see you next time. Yeah. Thanks very much. Bye.
You have been listening to Raymond King and Kit Franklin. Brash Ag. Supported by the Douglas Bomford Trust. Thank you, and tune in next time.